Hello, listeners. Welcome to another interview. We have had a dry spell with it, but we're going to continue today with a conversation with Attorney General Eric Schmitt of Missouri, who is running for the U.S. Senate. He has a long track record of being involved in politics in the Show Me State, and we're going to talk about current events. Attorney General Schmitt, very good to speak with you.
Great to be with you.
Could you give my listeners and viewers kind of an overview of your experience in politics and what led you to run for the U.S. Senate in wake of Roy Blunt retiring?
Yeah, so I've served as Attorney General, and it's been an honor of a lifetime. I was the first person in my family, to be a lawyer, to go to law school, and so to be the lawyer for the 6 million people of my state is a great honor. And I've taken that charge. I take that duty to uphold the Constitution, to defend and uphold the Missouri Constitution, the federal Constitution very seriously. And so it's guided a lot of our legal efforts, of course. I've taken that charge, very seriously. And when President Trump was in office, we were defending the America First agenda when we had, record-breaking job growth, wage increases, secure border, energy independence, all those great things that we had under President Trump. We were defending those in court. And now, since Joe Biden's been in office, we've taken a blowtorch to that agenda. Missouri has really been in the lead on a lot of those big fights, whether it's immigration, energy. We were the first state to file on the COVID vaccine mandates with OSHA, had a big win there. So we've been in the mix on all these big important fights. And for me, the reason why I'm running for the Senate, I think all these big issues are going to roll through that chamber over the next decade. I think that we're, going to be in the middle of the most consequential time, one of the most consequential times in our nation's history. We're going to decide whether or not we're going to be the freest country in the history of the world or not, whether or not, OSHA, for example, which is supposed to make sure forklifts beep when they back up, can force a medical procedure on 80 million people or not, whether or not, don't just talk about the sovereignty of other countries' borders, but we care about the sovereignty of our own borders. Those kinds of big issues, what kind of justices we're going to have confirmed to the United States Supreme Court, what judges we're going to have at lower courts. Those kind of big things are, again, the Senate's going to play a critical role. It's a 50-50 Senate. We need proven conservative fighters there. That's why I'm running, and looking forward to the opportunity.
Obviously, the primary is not until August 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. And there are a lot of people running. It's a crowded primary, but there are maybe a handful of you, including yourself, who are kind of emerging as the more kind of viable candidate. So how do you separate yourself and how do you distinguish yourself from some of the 2 to 3 other competitors you have in the Republican primary? Why are you the best positioned to win the primary and ultimately the general in your mind?
Well, I don't think you can keep sending the same people to Washington, D.C., right, and expect different results. And so some of my opponents have been there for a very long time, and their voting record's not exactly very conservative. I'm never going to quit on Missouri. I'm, going to continue these big, important fights. And so I think what separates me from the field is a lot of people are going to talk about things or have opinions about things. I've actually taken action. We've been fighting and winning against the Biden administration. And I think, people want somebody who's been a proven conservative fighter who's never going to quit on the state. That's my record. And I'm, again, I think being endorsed by people like Senator Ted Cruz and the National Association for Gun Rights and having an A+ rating from the NRA and the Senate Conservatives Fund coming in, has endorsed people like Rand Paul and Ted Cruz and Mike Lee. That's who I'm going to be in the Senate. A strong conservative voice for this state. And so I think that's what separates me in the field. And I think why we've gained so much support. The polling looks very strong. The fundraising's been strong. All of those kind of measurements you can have right now at 3 months out. We're in a good place. We've got a lot of momentum, and we're going to work really, really hard for the next 3 months to win the primary.
It's a lot of time between now and August. So certainly there's probably a lot that could change, but you seem to be, according to polling, starting to gain the momentum. So we'll definitely keep track of that and follow your progress with respect to your race. But we were talking before going on the air about kind of a bombshell story, kind of unprecedented in media, and anyone who works in law or media or just casually observes politics, this has never happened. But obviously we learned through Politico of the leaking of the Dobbs decision, which was a draft opinion, not the final opinion. And it showed that the Supreme Court majority, it wasn't Chief Justice Roberts, but it was, let's say, if Alito were the Chief Justice. So an opinion, if it were to be him, it would be 5-3 with Chief Justice Roberts abstaining. And that has put a lot of people into a tailspin, obviously, what the result would be if it were to be the final thing, but also just the nature of the leak is the first time something like this ever happened. It's kind of violated a lot of norms. We don't really see that same perception from many on the left. What is your takeaway from this reveal or leak of the Dobbs decision, which isn't final, but also just the nature of this type of leak?
Well, I hope it is ultimately the final decision. It's certainly something that I've advocated for in our court filings, in our cases, and then also in the amicus brief that we filed on behalf of Mississippi in the Dobbs case. And so I'm hopeful, but clearly this was an attempt to intimidate. It is unprecedented. It literally has never happened before in modern American history that a draft opinion like this would be leaked. And I think the left is, there's no norm, there's no rule, there's no law that they're not willing to ignore or violate for raw power and a result. And this is a peek behind the veil there on what they're willing to do to try to intimidate the justices and try to I guess get somebody to change their point of view on this. So it's a shame. It's a tragedy, but it's not surprising. It's unprecedented, but not surprising.
A similar issue, which could be affected by the courts, but not exactly like abortion, but the Second Amendment. I think this Supreme Court is supposed to hear the New York Rifle Pistol Association case, which would ultimately, if it goes in a lot of the favor that a lot of people are hoping in the Second Amendment space, it would overturn the last outstanding May issue laws to make it so Americans will have a vested right to carry outside the home, usually largely in a concealed fashion, not an open carry fashion, but that could be determined upon the states. But what are your hopes of that court case? Have you had any insight into the case recently? We don't know when it's going to come out, but what are your thoughts on that pistol case from New York?
So that is another obviously very important case. Missouri, our office, we've led that briefing actually in the New York pistol and rifle case. And we're very proud of that. And I think it stands for this very important proposition that, the founding of our republic is based on this idea that we're born with certain rights, right? They come from God, and government is just our shared project to protect those rights. The Second Amendment is meant to ensure that our right to defend ourselves is protected. It doesn't give us that right. We're born with that right. And so Missouri is a constitutional carry state. Actually, when I was in the state Senate, voted for that. Been obviously a big proponent of the Second Amendment. This case, as you pointed out, stands for this May issue regime in New York that you actually have to prove to a bureaucrat that you are in danger or that you have some special circumstance that would allow you to carry a weapon to protect yourself or your family. And so in the Heller decision about 15 years ago was a seminal case. It stood for an individual's right, to protect themselves, clarified a lot. In the lower courts, you've seen some moving away from that of maybe that just exists inside the home and not outside the home. So this is a very important case to clarify that. Very hopeful about that. I think it's always hard to make these sort of predictions about what the Supreme Court may or may not do. But I think the fact that they didn't take any Second Amendment cases before Justice Barrett came on might lead you to believe that there weren't 5 votes for something like this. And now they believe they have 5 votes because it only takes 4 to take a case. And of course, it takes 5 to have a majority view on it. So we're very hopeful that since they've taken the Second Amendment case, that we'll get a favorable outcome. Missouri's been very involved with that. I'm proud of our work on it. So we'll see.
Much like Missouri, a lot of states have adopted constitutional carry into law. I think 25 states now stand to have the law or put it into effect once the summer hits. Could you explain so far what Missouri has seen? A lot of critics of constitutional carry say the implementation of the law will lead to a lot more crime, a lot more criminals committing acts involving guns. Could you respond to that charge? What has Missouri seen?
Yeah, that's just not true. And it's proven not to be the case. I mean, you have law-abiding citizens that want to protect themselves and their families. And so that has always been a red herring. In fact, that was a red herring when Missouri adopted concealed carry in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. That was the claim. It was going to be a shootout at the OK Corral in every town square. That was proven to be a falsehood and a lie. And constitutional carry has been the same. Again, it gets back to this fundamental question of people having the right to defend themselves. And, the government restricting that in a way of not allowing people to do that is unconstitutional. And so, yeah, Missouri is one of those states. I can't remember when we did it in 2016, what number state. I think we were just a handful of states at the time in 2016 when we did it, moved forward on it. But it's proven to be, very important. And the real issue we have with crime. Look, if gun control was the answer here, Chicago would be the safest city in the country, and it's not. By the way, it's incredibly dangerous. So all those sorts of lies that have been out there are pointed out actually in our brief in the in New York pistol and rifle case. So we sort of make this philosophical argument about where our rights come from, and you can date it back to the glorious revolution in England when these things started to be talked about, and it carries over to our constitutional framework. You talk about some of the statistics about crime rates and what the Second Amendment actually allows people to do, and people are safer in their communities because of it. So there's a lot in that briefing that kind of summarizes these issues. But Missouri, the impact has been very positive, and certainly not an uptick in crime because law-abiding citizens want to defend themselves.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Also, Missouri, let's move over to kind of conservation and energy now, if you'll indulge me on these questions. The Show Me State is home to Bass Pro Shop. It's also home to the Ozarks and lots of other beautiful wild spaces. And it's represented by conservatives. What do you hope to do in terms of advancing conservation, which sees human input in natural resources management and also hunting, fishing, true conservation of the sort as positive contribution? So what do you hope to contribute on that front if you are to be elected to the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. Having the perspective of being a Missourian. I mean, the natural beauty of our state, the rivers and the streams and the fishing and the hunting and the wildlife is, I'd put it up against any state. Certainly the lower 48 of what you can learn and be a part of. And that tradition's passed down generation to generation. I'm an avid hunter and I love it. Missouri has a lot to offer there. And I think that's a perspective about, being good stewards, right? I think that's very important. That's what conservation really means. And I think you can do that, by the way, and also be an advocate for, energy and energy independence. And those things aren't mutually exclusive. But you're right. Missouri is a beautiful place. We've got a great tradition, whether it's on the conservation front or people enjoying. Float trips are a big thing. And so there's so many rivers that feed into the Mississippi or into the Missouri River. It's quite frankly why Missouri became the first state, save Louisiana, west of the Mississippi. It's where the rivers came together. There's a great story about the Boot Heel. If people look at a map, there's that Boot Heel in Missouri. There was a guy by the name of John Walker who bought a bunch of land in that area after the New Madrid earthquake, which was a huge earthquake. But that area at the time was pretty much just swamp. And he bought it, and when Missouri was petitioning to be a state, he went to Congress to lobby for that area, which wasn't supposed to be in Missouri, to be in Missouri, because he saw the opportunity, the rivers coming together. It's a beautiful state with a lot of opportunity. And I think that story of Walker getting the Boot Heel part of Missouri is emblematic of who we are as a state. It's a great place.
That's fascinating. And do you have a favorite species you like to hunt or a fish you like to target?
I like, bass fishing's big here, obviously, and that's a lot of fun. I like pheasant hunting and duck hunting. Bird hunting is I deer hunt. Being 6'6" at a deer stand is always a little bit, I love it, but it's different. The climate, I like getting out when you're pheasant hunting or quail hunting, you're walking, you're talking to friends. Duck hunting, you've got the confluence here, right? Where the Missouri meets the Mississippi. It's one of the great flyways in the world if you're there in the right time of the year. So that's a lot of fun and get to do it with friends and family. And
I think if I'm not mistaken, Missouri does have a burgeoning elk herd as well. Yeah. And that's really actually cool to see.
Yeah. Yep. And the black bear coming back. So the conservation department, I think, reintroduced elk is probably about 10 or 15 years ago now. And so you're starting to see a season exist. It's pretty limited, but I think it's neat.
Yeah. And I actually wrote a story about how radical environmentalists were trying to ban black bear management after the assembly or the state legislature voted to approve it, or rather the conservation department voted to approve it. And we've kind of seen that on the national scale too, about people trying to intervene with lawsuits. Do you hope to kind of counter that if you were to go into Congress? Because I know that Roy Blunt was actually really, really, I would say, keyed in on Endangered Species Act reforms, making sure that wildlife conservation law wasn't misinterpreted. Do you hope to kind of bring that perspective to the Senate too? knowing what you
Yeah,
know from the state?
yeah, Missouri is uniquely situated in a number of ways on that front, and also from an agricultural perspective, right? Missouri is very agriculturally diverse. I mentioned the boot heel; they can grow everything there, including rice and cotton and tobacco, except citrus. And one of the, I think, neat things about Missouri too is I had an attorney general ask me when I first became AG. One of my colleagues said, "So is Missouri a northern state or a southern state or a western state or a midwestern state?" And I said, "Yes," because all of those things are true. We came into the Union as sort of this western frontier state. When my ancestors came over from Germany, Missouri was on the end of the map, right? It was as far west as you could go. On the railroad stopped. It's probably considered by most to be a midwestern state now, but it has the boot heels. Very southern. Southwest Missouri is a little bit more like Texas and Oklahoma. Northern Missouri looks a lot like Iowa. So it's agriculturally diverse. It's culturally diverse. Uh, you know, uh, Hunting and fishing opportunities are diverse. And I think you gain a lot of perspective from that, and certainly want to take it to DC.
It would be good to have more hunters and anglers like yourself in the Senate. You guys can add some newfound perspective. But let's talk about energy. So obviously, day one of Biden's administration, he's made a lot of his energy policies very climate centric. He canceled the Keystone Pipeline. That's a very big component, but he also did a lot to kind of undercut the oil and gas leasing program and put a lot of policies into place. They're innumerable. If I read to you what they all were, I think we would take several hours to talk. But he's done a lot of policies to kind of advance this preservationist kind of environmental policy where they really, really want to welcome top-down solutions, don't really have, let's say, private sector input. And it's going to come at a cost for all of us. And to transition away from fossil fuels, that's kind of what they want to do. But what has been your response to that? And what do you hope to push if you were to go into the Senate? What type of energy policies would you like to enact or help influence if you were to be able to be in such a position?
Yeah, so Missouri's been right smack dab in the middle of these big important fights on energy. And we're not a big energy producing state in that regard, but obviously as consumers of energy, and the people that I represent, these price fluctuations and options, I mean, it's a real problem for middle class Missourians. The increases they're seeing, not just at the gas pump, by the way, right? But natural gas costs and everything that ends up in the grocery store, right? That has to be transported from one place to the next. And so we're seeing these big inflationary pressures, and it's a direct result of this disastrous Biden energy policy. As you said, he came in on day one and did a bunch of things, canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. He actually did something. Missouri was the first state to file on what's called the social cost of greenhouse gases rule.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, a lot of people don't know about it, but it's like the Green New Deal that nobody ever had to vote on. It's nuts. I mean, essentially, John Kerry, the so-called climate czar, and cabinet secretaries in about 60 days came together and projected and predicted, like Nostradamus, all of the future warfares and migration patterns due to climate change. Hundreds of years into the future, they pull it back into real time, into present day value, and tax and regulate manufacturing and agriculture. It's really it'll literally cost millions and millions of jobs, cost billions of dollars out of our economy, and it's just not based on science or any accuracy. It's just an agenda. It's a leftist agenda that, quite frankly, was rhetoric before, but now is a reality. And so we've sued on the leasing issue of the offshore leasing, the leasing on federal lands. You name it, Missouri's right in the middle of those fights. And in some instances, we're winning, and some, we're going to have to continue to fight as each one of these rules come down from, whether it's from transportation or the EPA. I did have a farmer tell me in Northwest Missouri several months ago. He's like, "Eric, I don't ever remember voting for the deputy undersecretary of the EPA." Right? But this person, who nobody knows their name, but can issue a guidance letter. In effect, I mean, Waters of the U.S. is a classic example of this, right? And they're bringing it back, which would really affect 98% of Missouri land. And that, of course, was originally intended by Congress to deal with navigable waterways, right? Like the Missouri River, the Mississippi, not a dry creek on somebody's farm hundreds of miles away from the Mississippi River. And so they've really lost their way. It's also emblematic, by the way, of the administrative state. and how it's totally gone wild. One of the things that I want to do in the Senate is really be a champion for dismantling the administrative state. It's gotten way too powerful. It's not accountable to anybody. If you think of the founders' vision, they very much understood ambition and accumulations of power and what tyrants tried to do. So the idea was you spread out power, right, through the checks and balances and separation of powers. No one branch or agency or person could ever get too powerful. And the reason for all that, underlying all of it, was to protect individual liberty. I don't think they could have envisioned Congress, the Article 1 branch, which is supposed to jealously guard its power, willingly ceding all of this to these agencies. And by the way, the Congress has a role to play in this and a lot to blame. They have been able to say for a long time, I voted for the greatest bill in the world, but I can't believe what the EPA did, or I can't believe what OSHA did. And we got to pull that back. And I think Congress ought to be voting on these things. I think President Trump had a 2-for-1 rule, right? Where if you're going to propose one new rule, you had to pull back 2. Well, Biden got rid of that on day 1 too. Let's make it statutory. And why, by the way, does it just need to be 2-for-1? Make it 10-for-1. Because not only are you going to pull back a lot of these regulations that don't make any sense, they'll probably be less willing to move forward with that new one in the first place. And so one of my missions and things I'm passionate about that often it won't end up on the front page of newspapers is this administrative state. It's gotten way too powerful. You've seen it with the CDC. I mean, there's example after example now. OSHA, again, we referenced that. Making sure forklifts beep when they back up, not forcing 80 million people to get a medical procedure. That's never was its charge, but they try to put an elephant into a mouse hole, and we gotta push back.
Yeah, the administrative state is very overarching in energy and environment, and we do see that with what they're trying to put into place from the EPA to Department of Interior now. And it seems like it's caused a lot of confusion to regular people, and it seems to harken back to what was happening under the Obama administration. So that's what I warn people about.
Right. And look, if Congress votes on these things, people have the ability in our system of self-government to either send people there or send them home, right? You don't get a chance to do that with an administrative state that runs wild and nobody even knows who's in charge or making the decisions. In many instances, they think they're just going to outlast the elected officials because they're the experts and are in charge. I mean, this is a really destructive mindset that plays itself out. And by the way, I've been a big proponent of tax cuts. I've in Missouri passed 2 of the largest tax cuts in the history of the state, the first one in 100 years. When President Trump proposed that tax cut, I was the first statewide elected official in the country to come out in support of it. So I believe in that. But I think the regulatory environment in many ways too is just affects these business decisions that, of course, means real jobs for real people. And so we got to get it under control, and you got to have somebody with a laser-like focus on it that's going to build a coalition to tackle it.
Could you expand more on what you hope to do on the economic policy front? It's also interesting that a lot of Republicans, I've noticed this in my 10 years of writing, reporting, working in politics, that a lot of Republicans talk a great talk about reining in spending, reining in taxes, but they only fulfill part of that. Do you hope to tackle federal spending as well?
Absolutely. And again, what separates me from some of the other folks in the field here, I think Republicans have to get their sea legs back on being, fiscal hawks and being, fiscally conservative and not just voting for all these budget busting bills, these, omnibus bills that spend money like, a bunch of drunken sailors. So we got to get a handle of that. One thing to do would be to pass a balanced budget amendment. I support that. We ought to pass that. We ought to structurally put things in place that doesn't allow Congress to keep spending money they don't have. It's a moral issue. You just can't keep pushing this debt on to the next generation over and over and over again and think that that's going to work out. I mean, so the party's got to end in DC. That's going to be what I support. I think, lower taxes, less regulation, but in a meaningful way, right? A lot of people say that, but what concrete things can we do? Well, we saw what happens. Anytime you've had broad-based tax relief, whether it was JFK, Ronald Reagan, President Trump, you've seen massive economic growth, more opportunity for more people, wage growth for any demographic, African Americans, whites, Hispanics, whatever. Wage growth was at an all-time high. And what do you see now with this, really kind of Keynesian liberal mindset is you see the economy restricting, you see less opportunity, people, the jobs aren't paying what they were paying. You've got a labor shortage. So I think taking that perspective and being serious about these fiscal issues, not having the baggage of what a lot of people have who are in DC right now, who are afraid to take it on because they voted for all these terrible spending bills. Build Back Better is a disaster. All this infrastructure. I mean, I think like 7% of the things that were in the infrastructure bill were actually related to infrastructure. I mean, everything was infrastructure. It was a joke. So anyway, I think, and I'm going to DC, to be a fighter and be unafraid. I don't care if I get invited to cocktail parties. I don't care about any of that. I want to go do a job, be a firewall, a conservative fighter up there that believes in this America First policies at the core of who I am, and come back home to Missouri and spend time with my friends and neighbors and family. I don't need to be in DC all the time, that's for sure.
Similarly, with the Biden administration, it seems like they want to hinge business creation and business leadership and tie it to union membership. We've seen this huge push to unionize everything, stemming from big businesses to self-employed people, much through the efforts like the PRO Act. And Republicans have started to combat that, and they've been defeated, the left, in terms of pushback in the Senate, although they want to find regulatory kind of hoops to jump through to enact this. But are you concerned about laws like the PRO Act, bills like the PRO Act that would repeal right to work, unionize every person from a freelance self-employed person to a gig worker to that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've supported Missouri is actually not a right to work state, which is a shame.
You guys aren't yet? Oh.
Yeah, no, well, briefly we were, then there was a ballot initiative that repealed it. And one of the failings of our former governor is that when he was going through all the scandal, this thing sort of happened, which was a mess. So yeah, no, I support right to work. I think it's a First Amendment right under the Janus decision, right? People have the freedom to associate in a way that they want to. They shouldn't be forced to. And so again, these are sort of fundamental issues for me. And I think that the Democrats they know a reckoning is coming in November. The American people, they want their country back. And so I think they're just trying to do whatever they can to push the envelope and go as far as they can, as quickly as they can, because they know what's going to happen in November. And we're not having traditional political debates right now in this country. I mean, the Democrats, we talked about the Supreme Court, the opinion leak, but they want to pack the Supreme Court. They're 2 votes away from that. Ending the filibuster, federalizing our elections, adding states to the union, having a complete open border and providing amnesty. I mean, they want to fundamentally change this country, and they're playing for keeps. And so you better get the right people up there, not just to get to 51, right? Which is, we got to get the majority back, but get the right people there. And again, that's why I'm running for the Senate.
Yeah, there are 59 million freelancers, and I know Missouri has a lot of self-employed freelancers too. So I think Republicans do need to pay attention to that, because that's kind of a burgeoning entrepreneurship. It's like the last frontier. So I was glad to get your thoughts on that. How about education? I know that's a big issue here in Virginia, where I'm from. My governor won on that pretext, and he was able to get a pretty big wide swath support among Republicans, Democrats, and even independents too. Do you believe in funding students and not systems? There we go.
I do. And I think this is by the way, it's the emerging civil rights issue of our time, by the way. The teachers' unions are a complete wreck. And actually, this is one of the things I think that separates me from the field too in the Senate race. But as the work as Attorney General, I mean, I've been completely unafraid to take on these, big institutions on this, because I believe in it. I believe that people ought to have more options. I also don't think our kids should be being taught to despise America with critical race theory. And that is happening. The left claims that this is just some, law school course or a graduate level course. That is a lie. And so we've been exposing it. We sued the largest school district in Missouri, Springfield Public Schools, for hiding documents related to critical race theory. They had something called the oppression matrix, which divides kids by oppressor and oppressed. Covert white supremacy, like if you believe in color blindness, or people should be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, that's covert white supremacy. Saying "Make America Great Again" is covert white supremacy. This stuff is nuts. It's completely nuts and has no place in our classroom. And so I'm fighting back against that. We've sued the Missouri School Board Association for hiding documents related to their involvement of the National School Board Association, working with the Department of Justice to weaponize the FBI to go after parents who had the gall to show up to school board meetings because they care about their kids' education. I mean, these people are crazy. And so we've taken them on. I'm not going to back down. We launched something called the Students First Portal, where parents are providing information that's happening in their school district that is objectionable, something called the gender unicorn. where they're pushing this agenda to, grade school kids. Parents have had enough of this. They want their schools back. They want their country back. We're fighting for them. I was actually the only attorney general, I think, the leading attorney general on these mask mandates. I mean, I mentioned we sued on the OSHA vaccine mandate and won. I sued 47 school districts here in Missouri who had, forced masking policies, because it's not based on science and it's not based on data. It's about power and control. And so I was sticking up for those kids and sticking up for those parents. And so, yeah, these education issues are certainly kind of kitchen table issues. I mean, when you go around the state and talk to people, this is what's on the front of people's, the tip of their tongues. We saw last week the Department of Homeland Security talking about a disinformation governance board, literally a ministry of truth. And so we're, going to push back on that as well. So these are fundamental issues of who we are as a country. Are we going to be the freest country in the history of the world or not? Do we believe in the First Amendment or not? And, I'm going to side with freedom every single time.
Where can my listeners and viewers connect with you if they're interested in following your campaign, AG Schmitt?
Yeah, Schmitt for Senate, SCHMITT for Senate.com is a great way to learn about what we're doing, sign up for updates, that kind of thing. We've got a media center there that we pump out a lot of content. And then I'm on the Twitter machine at Eric_Schmitt and the Facebooks, everything. So we're on social media too. We'd love to connect with folks because we got a lot going on. And we've touched on a little bit of it here in the interview, but as you can see, I've been very active as the AG in Missouri to take this fight to the left. And I want to do the same thing in the Senate.
Great to speak with you, Attorney General. And we wish you the best of luck in your campaign.
Thanks so much.